okay, the king crab part is partially true. I do eat a lot of that. I'm eating so much of that the last time I had that at dinner at my family's house, I didn't even touch the dish because I was tired of it. And I'm not
You were sick
exaggerating.
of it.
I was sick of it. It was no longer exotic or unique to me at that point.
Welcome to Proudly Asian, a podcast series that tells bold and proud stories of Asians by Asians. My name is Isabel, your podcast host, and I'm here to find stories that challenge biases we face every day. There's never just one way to look at Asians. This podcast will take you through a deep dive into the life stories, struggles, and triumphs of young Asians around the world. On today's episode, we have Lingjie, a first-generation Chinese-American from Flushing, Queens, New York. He's a full-time stay-at-home dad and the co-host of West Asian Podcast, who lives by one creed: why work when you don't have to? He joins us to talk about his Asian dad money philosophy and why Alaskan king crab is on his dinner table all the time. Welcome back to Proudly Asian. Now, continuing our Money Smart series in November, we'll be speaking with smart Asians, or Asians who have smart money management ideas from around the world. So, of course, they are not going to be investment advice. We're not going to be doing stock picking, but rather we are tapping the collective wisdom of our guests from around the world, and hopefully they can prepare you or give you some tips and knowledge or experience sharing to equip you with any unexpected money situations that might be coming your way. So in this episode, we are bringing in one of the most money smart friends that I know, despite he might not agree. But fun fact, he's a full-time husband and dad. He's not working. He doesn't have any full-time work unless he has any major life updates for us this episode. But he's been living this lifestyle forever, and he has once proclaimed on his podcast that he just doesn't like working, and that's why he doesn't work. So I can't find a better guest than this person. And this is a completely brand new guest. He hasn't joined our podcast before because before this person joined as podcaster Lingjie, but today he's joining us as Rich Lingjie. So welcome to Proudly Asian, Rich Lingjie.
Thank you, Isabel. My God, that's all a very roundabout way of saying I'm unemployed.
Well, I mean, in your dictionary, employment doesn't exist.
It's a life choice. As with many things in life, you can choose whether or not you want to be employed.
So yeah, I mean, I'm sure like if this gets out on YouTube or like social media, that will attract a lot of haters, and then they will leave comments like privilege.
Privilege, yeah. I mean, in many ways, I will talk about later. I am very privileged, but at the same time, it's funny how you're doing. I think we said this off air. It's funny how you're doing a series on financial literacy and advice this entire month, which I think is great. And then you invited me onto this podcast. Initially, I wasn't sure what we were doing. And now I feel a bit out of place to say, or like I'm faking it to be placed within this. So I will probably be giving you guys less actual financial advice, and I guess more a philosophy on how you should handle money and your life and things like that. That's what I'm going to try to do, because I don't think I'm the most financial literate person, or I know exactly what you should be doing tit for tat with your money. But I do feel like hopefully through the course of this conversation, we can talk about our views on money, your view, my view, and just what people should be thinking as we obsess over money our entire lives.
Yeah, if anything, that's what a lot of people need. Like rather than a guru coming in and be like, hey, like I'll give you a formula that will ensure, like money success.
Exactly, right? And I think I've said this to you or to a lot of other people. The past 10 to 15 years, when the markets and world conditions were great, you could put a blindfold on, take a dart, throw it at a board, pick a stock, and as long as you held on long enough, quote unquote, long enough, you were making the correct stock choice or the correct financial decision, right? You were in a market where things were just so abundantly good that it was hard to not make money. Now, like to your point, now that markets are more rough and the world is completely different now. Now it's going to be a true test of whether those quote unquote financial advisors know what the hell they're actually doing.
Exactly. Now, but then before we get into the whole talks about like money philosophy or like how you got rich, how you could
I
afford
didn't get
eating
rich.
king
You need to
crab
stop
every day.
inserting that. Okay, the king crab part is partially true. I do eat a lot of that. I'm eating so much of that the last time I had that at dinner at my family's house, I didn't even touch the dish because I was tired of it. And I'm not
You were sick
exaggerating.
of it.
I was sick of it. It was no longer exotic or unique to me at that point. But the rich part, I'll fight back on. Sorry, you were saying.
I'll rephrase like how people can actually learn from you your lifestyle of eating king crab to the point that you're sick of it. So we're going to talk about that in a bit. But for our listeners who haven't really listened to the previous episode when you joined us along with Curtis, where we talked about being podcaster, just very quickly, quick introduction about you, Lingjie. Who are you? What are you? Where did you grow up? And how rich are you?
Oh my God. My name is Lingjie. I was initially born in mainland China. I then moved over to Paris, France for a couple years when I was young. Eventually found my way over here. It's the very not common story of just your parents chasing a job and employment wherever they could. That's why we bounced around so much. Eventually settled here in New York City in America. And I've been in this entire area for the past 30 years or so. I am currently a full-time dad. I do a little bit of stuff to keep myself occupied. Part of that is a hobby that you and I both collectively share, which is not making money on the internet via a podcast. That's probably the least good financial advice I can give you. Aside from that, I don't think there's anything special about me. I just think I'm a regular person on the internet. If I do have a podcast, as you mentioned before, it's called Worst Asian Podcast. Much like you, it's just a passion project. We just have a good time talking about things that you and I want to talk about. So if anyone wants to listen to that podcast, you can. I'm always going to insert whatever plug I could in whatever platform I'm invited on. So thank you, Isabel. And I hope we have a fun conversation because Isabel and I have talked a lot off air. So hopefully this is a more casual conversation, not so much an interview, because I do think at some point during this conversation, I do want to ask you, Isabel, some questions as well on behalf of the listeners, mainly myself.
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, now I'm definitely not nervous because I definitely don't have a lot of money philosophy. Even before I walked into this recording, I kind of like thought about, oh, if I am going to talk about my money philosophy, what would that be? And I just feel like I don't have a very like well established or like developed money philosophy yet. I mean, just because I feel like everyone feels the same. Even, like for people that we perceive as rich, like we were like, oh, how did you make it? But then they would always answer like, oh, did I really make it? Like, I don't feel like it. So I feel like in a way, this is kind of like a equalizer for everyone. Like no one would think that they are doing well in terms of money. I don't know if it's
Everything is
true.
relative, when you say making money by our standards, it's probably different as opposed to like someone that's in a different environment. Their idea of making money is just not having to worry about paying the rent. I'm sure you and I can both say that we're at least privileged enough to not really have to worry about whether or not we have to pay rent this month, next month, right? You and I probably have like a decent enough backup nest in the bank that we don't think too much about those things. So like you said, whether or not you've quote unquote made it is completely relative to where you are.
Since you mentioned a little bit about your childhood, your parents' journey going from mainland China, France, and then eventually to America, I'm wondering your growing up experience because like we talked a lot, but then I feel like we don't know a lot about like your growing up experience, like any specific memories. But then I'm wondering if your upbringing and childhood memories ever informed any concepts or ideas or relationship that you have with money.
Yeah, I think that's always true. No matter who you are, what environment you go around, what philosophies or the way that your family members in your household handle money, whether or not you directly are aware of it, you're absorbing that. And in some ways, you're going to grow up to be much like what you grew up around. So my parents, like every traditional Asian family that I know of, well, like I said, we traveled around because not we, because I was a kid at that time, but my parents were chasing employment. They were simply looking for work wherever they could. And my parents are not very well educated, right? I think they're great, smart people, but of course, the educational system, they never went through it fully. They only went up to a certain grade because that's where their life allowed them to do. So they didn't have the tools at their disposal to get quote unquote good jobs. So they just chased employment wherever they could. That, in addition to just how much my parents worked once we eventually landed in America, in New York, really taught me like the same boring stuff, right? Work a lot, save a lot. Why are you saving a lot? You're saving a lot so that you can eventually buy a house, because in a lot of Asian families, home ownership is the pillar of financial security. You're working so that hopefully at some point in your life, you don't have to worry about whether or not you have a job, because if you have a house that's fully paid for, then that is something to always fall back on, even on the roughest of times. So those very typical Asian things are what I grew up around. And for better or worse, I absorbed a lot of it, and I took with it and I did with it what I could based on how my parents taught me to perceive money, right? I'm sure if I grew up in a house that was more privileged relative to what I had, that I would have perceived money very differently. But in a lot of different ways, no matter how much I try to fight it, I'm always thinking, how much harder can you work? How much more can I save?
And I'm just wondering if at some point you would have carried any money habits with you that maybe like your entire life you would think those were common, that everyone would do the same. Like, have you ever had that realization where like you kind of held on to some money habits, but then you realized not everyone does that? I'm asking with maybe kind of like a specific example in mind. Like I was reading some, personal finance books, and then I realized that, like one characteristic that's shared by a lot of people who grew up in an Asian household would be that scarcity mindset.
Yeah, of course, of course. When you don't know where the next meal is going to come from, you're very careful and deliberate with the choices that you make now. I can't think of any specific examples off the top of my head, but I remember growing up my entire life, and then this is maybe you're similar to this based on how your parents were, but everything that we bought, whether it was like a small purchase at the grocery store that day or a quote unquote large purchase, it would always be on sale or clearance, or it would always be like the price of it would always be talked down at some point. Never do I ever remember that we would just buy something at the full MSRP price, because my parents always thought, okay, if this is not on sale now, we can wait for it to be on sale. Or when we needed certain things, we would shop on clearance. You and I were joking about buying winter clothes in the summer, right? Because traditionally, jackets and shit are really cheap during the winter, because either they have stock from the past fashion season, or it's a slow season for them, so they need to bring in some income, right? So there's always stuff that you can do to save money on whatever you're going to buy. Like, you should never, and this is how my parents taught me, buy an impulse large purchase, because most of the time you're just buying it and you're going to regret it at some point. Always take a second, detach yourself from the situation and think about it. Nowadays they would say just pick up your phone, check on Amazon, check on eBay, check on wherever, see if you can find the same thing at like a cheaper price, right? So never buying stuff at full price is like a big thing that I learned from my parents that I still carry with me to this day. No matter how I view money, I feel if you can save $1 or $2 on something and it's not too much of a hassle, why not, right?
Have you ended up like developing any hacks, or for example like putting together spreadsheets, or like discovering any apps that could like allow you to compare the prices of different items that are on your wish list?
Oh, the comparing thing, not so much. But you know how online nowadays there are a lot of these websites that'll give you cash back on the purchase. So maybe I think
Right.
Rakuten or Mr. Ebates, or I don't know. There's like certain websites where if you just shop from a lot of these companies online, they'll just give you like 1%, 2% back. I don't know how exactly that works. I assume that the company itself is probably giving them something and that to drive traffic to their website. But wherever I buy anything online, if there is something that I can earn money back, I will do so. So on those websites, on those sites like I talked about, in addition on credit cards, I will never put anything on a credit card if it doesn't get me something back. Because ultimately, what's the point, right? Unless I don't have a choice. But I feel as if all my credit cards have 1% back on this or 5% back on certain categories. And these are like very simple things you can do. They're not things that you need to actively think about. If you have a credit card that gives you 1% back at a minimum, then you just charge it on your credit card. If you have certain credit cards that give you more back on gas or restaurants, have a few of those. You don't need to have a Rolodex of credit cards, but you should at the very least have like 2 or 3 credit cards, which will give you some cash back on certain things. And I feel like that's a very simple, almost passive way of making a couple extra dollars here and there on the things that you're already going to be spending money on.
For sure, yeah. And relating to what you just mentioned about like don't make a big impulse purchase, I think
Never.
I mean, I didn't know it was a habit or I didn't know it was a hack. But then somehow, when I was moving to this current flat before, somehow I developed this habit where, like, when I saw something that I thought I needed for the house,
Furniture
but then,
wise?
like, in hindsight, furniture or like decoration, I don't know. It's just like maybe like a slightly more expensive painting or coffee table, you know, something like that. Like I would see them and then be like, oh, I really want to get this one. But then I would actually stop myself from actually hitting purchase. I would copy the link to the purchase page and then paste it over to a spreadsheet that I was keeping. And then it was basically kind of like my furniture wish list. And then I would just like put it over on the spreadsheet and then forget about it for a few months. And then when I revisit the spreadsheet again, I would look at those items like, do I still want them? And then almost 100% of the time, I would look at the items like, why did I even want it in the first place?
Right, exactly.
So that's how I saved money. Yeah.
There are so many times when you go anywhere and you're just buying something for the sake of buying something because you want that immediate satisfaction of like having something new, right? But that satisfaction is very short term. You get it, you take it home, you put it down, it's there, it's nice to look at. That's not to say that the product is bad or it shouldn't be in your apartment. That's just to say that in that moment, at least, you're buying it because you want that sudden spike in endorphins and you want to feel good about that purchase. If wherever possible, and you can detach yourself from it. I think, like you said, it's always best just to like take a step back, think about it, go home, digest it. And this is not to be done for every single purchase. If you need to buy toilet paper, I don't think you should dwell on if you need toilet paper, right?
That's true.
You need toilet paper. Who cares if it's like an extra 2 cents, right? You need the toilet paper right now. But like large, medium purchases like that, discretionary luxury things like that, I think you should always, if possible, do a little bit of research.
Yeah, and I feel like deep down we all know that. I don't know, maybe some people might have that whole like spending problem and it's because they fail to differentiate what's needed or what are the items that they actually just, you know, like want instead of need. But I feel like deep down we all have that ability to differentiate. Okay, you know, the very fact that I paused and then put it over on my spreadsheet is probably deep down I knew that this is not really necessary and there's a potential chance that the item might not work for my house. So that's why I did that, right? Yeah.
There's like a thing I always talk about is we all obsess over money, whether or not you have a lot of money and you don't know what to do with it, whether or not you don't have a lot of money and you're obsessing over how to make more money. No matter where you fall on the spectrum, we all obsess over money. And I think to connect with that point, if you learn to better understand yourself as a person and what makes you happy in terms of tangible things, I mean, in terms of like what things actually bring you yourself intrinsic happiness, as opposed to you buying a fancy, I don't know, what's a fancy thing that you bought recently? I'm like putting you on the spot right now. Okay, luxury bag, Isabel. You bought a nice luxury bag recently of your favorite brand, right? It's one thing just to buy something because everyone else has it and now it's in trend. It's another thing if it's something that, if you really boil it down, you stop to think about it, actually brings you internal happiness. I always say that you should really not give a shit what other people think about you. And that's not to mean that you should be like a jackass like me and just like not give a shit about people. But that means that find happiness where it actually matters. So take for instance, I always joke about on my podcast, and I'm not trying to plug the podcast. I always joke about how I drive a older vehicle, a older, well-aged, vintage vehicle. But to me, that brings me no happiness to, let's say, have a nicer name brand, like luxurious new car every 2-3 years, right? To me, it brings no value. So I choose not to waste my money on that, and I choose to spend money elsewhere where I find value or where I find intrinsic happiness. So some people might, if they don't even know it, if they really think hard about it, like, why do you need that nice car? You could tell me it's safer, it's like smoother on the road, all the stuff that actually makes sense. But like for cars, for instance, certain cars up to a certain point, they get, there's diminishing returns in terms of how much better the car drives and is like makes you feel safer on the road compared to how much more it costs, right? There's probably a chart somewhere at some point where there is a good car that's It drives well. It's very safe. It's at a good price point. It's maybe not the cheapest car, but anything beyond that is just you're really buying the brand and you're buying the appeal of having a Audi or like a BMW or like a Lexus, right? It's like you're buying the brand as opposed to you're buying the actual safety of the car. So you should always boil it down to when you make these large purchases, and maybe this is a philosophy on cash overall, like why do you need something? Aside from toilet paper, like we talked about, why do you actually need something, right? Like, is it bringing you
Yeah.
happiness, or is it just trying to bring up your status so that other people perceive you in a better light?
That's so true. And I mean, I agree with you. Actually, when it comes to car purchases, I also don't really care about what brands of car that I drive until maybe I was chatting with my partner. I feel like somehow, which city you live in or the
Mm-hmm.
environment that you're in, it could potentially kind of like alter how you perceive things, even on a short term basis. Because, for example, in LA, everyone drives and basically their car is their identity. And I just
Yeah.
feel like, I wonder, it's like, oh, if one day I move to LA, will I change from a person who doesn't care about cars to a point where I would kind of rely on the car to kind of shape or tell my identity, or I don't know.
I think that's a good point. I think what you mean is wherever you are, wherever you're situated, your thoughts about what matters to you are changed by your environment. You're in a place right now where
Yeah.
maybe cars are not a necessity, so it's not that big of a deal, right? You move somewhere else like California where you really have to drive around, so then you look into cars. And when you start looking into cars, you maybe
Yeah.
start looking into nicer cars. And then before you know it, you're that person that has a really nice car, but this is like your first real car that you've had. So I think it's true. Our perceptions on the value of something, the quote unquote value of it, the per dollar value of it, is different based on where we are. Which is why,
Yeah. Yeah.
financial advice, whatever we're talking about today, whatever your guests are talking about this month, it's not like a cookie cutter approach for every single person. Even if you find one method from one person that seems closer to you, it's still going to be tailored to whatever your lifestyle is, to whatever you think matters more to your situation, right? Um, we
But
talk
if we
about
need
how,
to get
yeah.
real about, the fact that we live in a very materialistic world, especially everyone's kind of like under the influence of Instagram, like social media. I think these days social media has this huge influence over people's purchase decisions to the point that we didn't realize how influential these apps are, right? I mean, let's be real, we live in this world. So, coming from you, Lingjie, do you have any like wisdom or tips to share with our listeners, rather than just, okay, don't care about what people think of you?
Mhm.
Like, is there a mindset we can develop, while acknowledging this is the world that we're living in?
Yeah, dude, will tell. I will be the first one to tell you that money matters a lot. Obviously, to a point, it doesn't matter anymore. When you have what is your definition of enough, then it doesn't matter anymore. But I'm not going to tell a person that is fresh out of college, that has never had a job before, just go YOLO life. Money doesn't matter, because it's all based on where you are in your life. You do have to put in the work no matter where you are to settle on a point that's easy, right? We have a lot of these people now, especially like you said, given the internet, where people are always talking about how they're financially independent at such an early age, at an age that you and
Hmm.
I might have thought was not possible for our generation, right? And that skews your perspective on what you should be. But you should always be working hard up to a point. So going back to the person that just got out of college, I think no matter how you want to sugarcoat it, that person still has to work their ass off to, get into the workforce, find a job that hopefully he and she, or she will like, tolerate at best, and then make up some money, and then use that pool of money to do something else that they actually would prefer to do, right? No matter what, you need to, there's always a long journey to get to where you want to be. So you have to work hard no matter what. And to connect that with what I did was when I came out of college and up until maybe like 5 years ago when my son was born, I was always a workaholic. Like that was my philosophy. You had to just really work as hard as you can. But even at that point, I knew that I was working towards an end. So in terms of like answering your actual questions, like know where your end is. I have some general idea of where your end is, right? Don't just work blindly for the sake of working blindly. If you choose to work your ass off, that's great. I'll be the first person to tell you that if you really don't want to work 6, 7 days a week for a short period of time in your life, just to achieve the goals that you want to achieve the long-term goals, That is your personal choice. And you shouldn't feel shamed when other people tell you about, oh, you need to find work-life balance, which I think is very important. But if you're making a conscious choice and you're aware of the situation and you do want to work 6, 7 days for however many years to get to a goal, you should do it. And don't ever feel ashamed about it.
And when you were working full time, what did that like end look like for you?
The blurry end, because at that point I hadn't had my son yet, was just to have a house, have it paid off, retire by somewhere to 40 to 50. And this is for both me and my wife, to retire at the point where we are still young enough to enjoy our lives and had secure enough money that we could just work part-time or freelance or just take on, contract work here and there, right? That was where I foresee things. But I knew to get to that point, I needed to really make as much money and work as hard as I could. It's just that where I am right now happened a little bit faster not because I made more money, but because once I had my son, your perspective on things and where that ultimate goal becomes a little bit more clear. So it was not a blurry goal of retiring when I was 40. It was a more 2020 goal of just like spending more time with my son, and how do I need to adjust that goal relative to me wanting to spend more time. So like I said, life and your goals are just always free flowing. There isn't really going to be good advice that's going to fit you. And even if it fits you now, it's going to change based on where life takes you.
So how did that decision making work for you? Because you eventually, like you mentioned, you just flowed into the decision of like becoming a full-time dad. And of course, finance could be a huge consideration in there, right? So how did you make sure that you could get to this point and you will still be okay?
So I had the luxury of making that choice. Actually, I had the luxury of making the choice and acting on it, because the years and the decades prior to that, I worked hard and we saved up a lot of money. I worked hard. My wife worked hard. She's a registered nurse. I was doing property management / real estate at that time. So, we had disposable income that we were saving constantly throughout all those working years. So when it came to the point where we had a kid, and it was like, oh, maybe we could do this full time. Maybe we could I could give up my job and just do this full time, because we had the privilege of having, certain things already done. We already had a house purchase. Obviously, we still had a mortgage, but at least the house was, purchased. We had a decent amount in the bank that we could always fall back on. My wife was going to choose to still work at that time. She was just switching to like a place that was closer to home, so she wouldn't have to commute as long. There were different things that we had the privilege of, which is why, to my last point, you kind of have to, at some point in your life, choose to get through that rough period just so you can have the options in front of you. Because, hypothetically, if my son was born and we didn't have a house purchase yet, and we didn't have enough money in the bank to feel secure, I don't think I would have made that choice, because I went from a full-time job to zero income. That's like 6 figures less. All of a sudden, snap of a finger, you're done. That's a lot less money. So it meant that we also, in addition to having those pre-built safety nests, we also had to make hard financial choices, right? Like, how do we adjust our lifestyle so that we don't burn through all this money so fast, right? Or how do we adjust our lifestyle so that, we now prioritize our son and we can give him more of the funds that are available so that he has a good life, and then we have to adjust how we live our life. Luckily for me, my wife and I are very much on the same page. We're both cheap as hell, and we don't really look at luxury brands and things like that. So they weren't that difficult choices for us just because of our collective perceptions on cash. But we did have to make a lot of adjustments to make that work. And at the same time, I'm still young enough where I do know that worst case scenario, right? Let's say for whatever reason, we go on 5 vacations a year because that's what we want to do. YOLO, right? Take our son on 5 vacations a year. We have emergencies on the house. You need a new roof or whatever, and it eats through all our funds. I still know that I'm still young enough, and I'm at least fairly confident in my own ability to get a job to take care of my family. If it gets to the point, I am not ashamed to, let's say, go work at a fast food job if I have to support my family. I don't need other people to look at me oh, he has a white collar job as opposed to a blue collar job. But to me, that makes no difference how other people perceive me. If push comes to shove and I have to flip burgers to, make a living for my son, and that's my only option, I will do that. So making this big life choice was a bunch of different components coming together.
That's a very important thing to bring out. I mean, first of all, I really like how you set a really concrete vision or like visualize what that goal that you were working towards. You know, like a lot of people might have really vague goals like, oh, I want to get rich. But then what does rich look like to them, right? I mean, your goal wasn't getting rich, but then your goal was getting to that end point where you could potentially think about taking it easy, like not working 9 to 5. And that would look like you having a house or certain tangible things that were listed out. And I feel like in that sense, it would be a lot easier for someone to like work towards achieving those like goals that are clearly mapped out and visualized. And at the same time, I really like how you mentioned earlier that, even if that means you have to go back into the workforce in a job that's not as flashy as what people would perceive. But I feel like, yeah, these days it's like there's this like whole misconception about how like, oh, if you are not in a certain flashy job, it means you are dumb or like you're not competent. But then I feel like there's one thing that's not talked about enough is that people should make their job decisions at any given point in life based on their lifestyle. So let's say if they could only work 4 hours a day because they have other things to take care of, and if it means working as a barista at a cafe, that could give them that flexibility, right? That also goes into the decision making. It's not because they're in that job because they are dumb, because they can't go into a flashy job. Because at the same time, the flip side of a flashy office job could be that they don't have time left after 6 p.m.
Yeah, you really have to find a balance point between working at a job that you can tolerate, doing the hours, and having that family, friend, work-life balance. I think that is genuinely something that we struggle with. We probably are in a more fortunate situation, but I know a lot of people do struggle with that. You have a whole younger generation of kids that are coming out of school now, and it's either you land the big job or they don't want to do a lot of the blue collar jobs, like we said, right? For whatever reason. I don't want to blame everything on social media, but I feel social media does in some ways speed up the spread of what word am I looking for?
Romanticize.
Right. Even if you take, for instance, financial freedom and like all these people online that tell you what to do with your money, I feel like, and it's not their fault, but I feel a lot of people look at those people and think, oh, I have X amount of money sitting in the bank, whether it's $2, whether it's $10,000, I'm not doing anything with it. And then they start feeling bad, like I'm not having my money work for me. I need to be like all these people online who are getting like 2% here, doing an ETF here, doing a CD over here. Like there is this constant need to always keep up with what other people are doing, even if it's a good thing. Like it's good to have your money to be passively making money on itself and to accrue savings that way. But I feel like if you don't have the time to manage your money, you shouldn't feel like you're doing something wrong just because every financial influencer on the internet is saying that you should not have your money sit there and you should be doing something. So I think social media in some ways really just like speeds up this process about feeling bad about your situation, no matter where you are.
That's so true. Yeah. And I remember recently I was just watching a video of someone pointing out that how social media really influences people's purchase or like travel decisions now. Like even, like when you see like a reel of someone saying like 5 bucket list places that you should visit within a country. And those are the most expensive spots or like hotels within a country. And then it kind of like that 1 minute reel in itself just creates the pressure to someone who travels to that place. He or she might be thinking that I must visit all of these spots. But then they didn't realize that maybe the person who made that reel, they visited those places in the span of, let's say, like 10 years, something like that.
Yeah. Have you ever seen those comparisons where it's like this on social media and this in real life, where it's like the same exact spot? It'll be like on TikTok, it'll look so good, so glamorous. And then in real life, it's like tourists all lined up on queue for like half an hour to take the one same picture that you do. Like there is an expectation of those glamorous spots that I think never really matches when you go in real life. I'm sure like there are some places where it's just as grand and it's as beautiful as it seems. But, having your whole vacation be based around some glamorous, hyper edited, like 30-second clip of something, should not be how you do it.
Exactly. That reminds me of how when I went to Bali, I don't know if you have seen it around, but when it comes to Bali, there's this like always this photo of someone posing in front of like a temple or like a gate, and
Yeah.
then with a mountain in the back, and then they have this like reflection in the frame, right? And
Oh,
for the
okay.
longest time, I thought it was like a nice pond in front of the gate. But then when I went there for the first time,
Was
I
it a
was
puddle or
so
something?
damn shocked because there was literally this guy sitting on a plastic stool, and then he would take your phone, and then you pay a certain fee, of course.
Yeah.
And then basically he would put a mirror, like,
Oh, so the
yeah, at
reflection
the
was
bottom
not
of,
even like water. It was just a standard mirror.
it was just a mirror, and then you were literally standing around
Mm-hmm.
along with 100 or 200 people who were waiting to do the same photo, and then they had this whole like audio system to announce like you would get your ticket. Let's say if your ticket number
Wow.
is 56, you're waiting for your number to be called, and then you would go there. You're allowed to do 5 poses. I'm just like,
Yo,
what?
that's crazy, but the takeaway is whoever is the guide that is doing that has to be banking a lot of money because it's a constant
Yeah.
it's feeding itself, right? Because you're selling a service, but the people in turn are taking the product, the picture that you're making, and they're further advertising for your service, right? They're not like consciously doing it, but when they show other people the same picture, now those friends want to come back to you, the business owner, the guy who's taking the picture. So maybe the best financial
That's true.
advice is to do something like that, to be that person who makes
Yeah.
like a very
Oh my God.
photogenic Instagram, TikTok, social media spot, and just like have your one stool there.
I want to be working from a plastic stool like that. It's my dream job.
Hopefully he was making good money. Hopefully he's making good money, not even relative to the country's currency, but just good money overall. Because tourists tend to have more. Or
Yeah.
tourists would be willing to pay more than a local is for that Instagrammable photo. So hopefully that guy is doing well for himself.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, indeed, tourism actually supports the local economy quite a bit. And then they have,
Good.
just the nicest people there. And I'm glad that they are somehow able to live a better life off of tourism. So I think that kind of works out.
Yeah, I
And
heard
then also the
your
photo.
series on Bali, and it
Ah,
sounds
yeah.
fantastic. And it seems like the place that
Thank
you
you.
eventually want to retire to.
Yeah. But now it's become that like hip retirement destination, which is getting like kind of overcrowded.
Is
And
that a
then I feel
post-pandemic
like
thing?
yeah. So it's like apparently a lot of tourists, maybe like the Balinese people always say, oh, there are a lot of like Russian,
Mm,
Australian tourists around. And then one of the problems was that like people would go to Bali thinking that it's like Disneyland or like a theme park. They don't have to
mm-hmm.
think about consequences. Whatever they do, they can get like
Oh.
completely drunk, harass people, and then they could rent a scooter without an actual proper driver's license. So it's
Mhm.
causing a lot of accidents. So I feel like you'll get incredibly annoyed if you're there.
I cannot stand people like that. Inconsiderate people in all forms of life. I mean, I just can't do it. I can't do it all the time. I don't have road rage, but sometimes when I see bad drivers on the road who's, let's say, double parked and they're clearly blocking the entire road so that other cars can't come, and they're fully aware of what they're doing, but they're still choosing to do stuff like that. I
Mm.
cannot take. I mean, as a guy that sounds like a jackass myself, I cannot take like people like that because I feel like my form of jackassness is at least considerate jackassness. Like I will move my car if I'm blocking the way, but oh my god, people like that I just cannot stand. Have you heard this
Yours is
term
like
like
high level jackassness.
high level jackass? Have you heard this term revenge spending?
Yes.
Post pandemic, I feel like everyone is doing so much. Just like it's no longer tangible goods anymore. It's just like I'm gonna go out there and experience the world, whether it be restaurants more often during the week, whether it be like 2, 3 more vacations per year. Like there is a lot of people spending their money on that throughout these past couple of years.
Yeah. And it has become a trend as well, right? And then I just feel like on YouTube and on any given day, there will be a lot of like YouTube videos telling you, oh, like I quit why I quit my job, something like that. I mean, I think if it's a very well thought out decision, it's admirable. But then I just feel like it's kind of becoming worrying because this has become a trend. This kind of life decision has become a trend to the point that, which you mentioned earlier, some graduates who just got out of uni, they might think that's something that they need to work towards, or they might think, oh, it's cool to be quitting your job without really thinking about what that entails. So I think this is why I did this series as well, because like during the series, we also interviewed a couple more people who kind of made the conscious decision to quit their 9 to 5. And I wanted them to share, the whole decision making process, the mindset that they had, the planning that it took to get to that point. And you're one of them also.
Yeah, like I know exactly the types of videos that you're talking about. Like I quit my 6-figure job to, I don't know, like fish on the pond. It's a very glamorous clickbaity title. And you, no matter what situation you're in, you look at it like, oh shit, I want to fish in the pond and like not do anything all day, right? So you think that it's this possible option for you when in reality, it's just me making the numbers. It's like less than 1% of people are even in the situation where they can possibly think about doing it, let alone actually do that. It's only the very rare amount of people that are both maybe they've worked up a certain amount, or they're just their circumstances are to their advantage where they can do it, whether they're privileged, whatever the case is. It's like there's a very select amount of people that have the privilege of doing that. So it glamorizes this whole I need to quit and work for myself mentality. Everyone should always like try to do something for themselves, but do everything with a plan. You can't YOLO your way through life jumping around thinking I'm going to be the same as this YouTuber who's been doing that. Because I'm sure if you look into each person's story, they probably worked a lot to get to that point. And, if for those that are doing it online, they're probably doing it in some ways as a creative profession as well. Like their life documented online is also part of their revenue that they're generating, right? You may not have that. Not everyone has a very fun life when they want to retire. As crappy as it sounds, like sometimes a lot of us, most of us, are just meant to work 9 to 5, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's just that your views on that might need to change. Your wants and your desires from life might have to adjust. But I don't think everyone in the world can just like quit their jobs and like YOLO life.
That's so true. Yeah. And we're not here to criticize people's decisions to quit the 9 to 5, because like if it's something that's really for them and they really like took the whole decision making process to get to that point, then that's completely fine.
Exactly.
But then I feel like definitely the critical thinking needs to be enabled here whenever we're watching that kind of content. Like we need to start asking questions like, what is something that the person's not telling us, right? Like what's beyond the surface? Like did that person come from a very wealthy family? Or maybe that person might have like this whole, might have the ability to make a 5-minute video to make his or her life look very glamorous as a jobless person, but then maybe the person behind the scenes, he or she is in debt or like, I don't know.
Maybe it's just a temporary thing. Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
Or it's just like a temporary thing. Maybe they're doing this as a temporary thing. But when you look at it, you think, oh, this is a permanent thing. He's going to be permanently fishing in the small pond for the rest of his life. When in reality, maybe it's just like a short-term thing. This person quit his job for a year or two to, go travel the world, right? And they're spending the money that they save, which is a perfectly fine thing to do. And that's their plan. But you think of it as, oh, you can do that for the rest of your life.
I mean, taking a career break is a real thing, which, everyone should do that when they need it. But then what I really love doing is that whenever I come across these content, I would go back to the channel maybe like a year or 2 years later and see if they're still doing the same thing. Or are they still uploading content about the same thing? If they have been consistently doing that kind of content for at least 2 years, that's when you're like, okay, like I respect this person. Maybe he or she really has something useful to say.
There's so much good advice on the internet. You just have to really filter it and think what applies to you.
For sure. Yeah. But I mean, like, going back to the topic of this episode, which I have no idea what the topic is really.
Yeah, good luck to you when you have to title this episode. I don't know what the hell kind of title that you're going to make that's going to be tantalizing to your listeners. Old man in New York complains about why young people care too much about money.
Or as we like to tease you about, like you're the one among our podcaster friends who sits on bags of cash.
Bags
So
of cash. This is a
if I have to
constant
come
joke.
up with a very clickbaity title, it's like how to sit on bags of cash.
They're metaphorical bags of cash. They're not literal bags of cash. I'm sitting on I think this chair was free. Some company wanted to send me a chair just to test out the chair. So this chair is free. Everything I
Wow.
have is like whatever.
You know, like since now you're not in the 9 to 5 grind, you're kind of like a full-time husband, right? What does like budgeting look like to you? Like,
Sure.
do you sit down, spend the time to look through your finances every week or every month? Like, what does that look like for you?
If you know me for a long time or maybe even a short time, you know I probably am the person that makes an Excel sheet with all the estimated expenses for the month. And then at the end of the month, he'll calculate and categorize every expense. And then he'll see whether I'm over or under budget that day. And he'll track every single dollar that he spends. Up until like 6 months ago, I was totally that person. 100%. I had an Excel sheet for everything. You know, like I knew what my fixed costs per month were. You know, like the mortgage, gas, electricity, insurance, this, insurance that. Like there were fixed bills and fixed expenses that I always had. So to a minimum, we always needed to have that amount. I will say though, now that for the past year, I have not been doing that. For the past year or so, I have not been doing that. I still have a good general idea of how much we spend. It's tough because if you really want to sit there and you want to plan your budget, which I think everyone should do, not month to month, but maybe every year, just refresh it. Sit there, take a look at it, see how much you spend on fixed things that are an absolute, see how much roughly you spend on like food, travel, things like that, and see like what was worth it that year. I think some people really should, as long as you have the time, do that once a year or so, because you'll be surprised like how much money you spend on certain things and how much money you could be spending on things that you thought you were already saving a lot on. Saving a lot. Could be spending money on things. I probably have the nots and is mixed up on that. But what I mean is like you need to really assess how much you're spending, because if you want to make good decisions, you need to have the information to make good decisions. Don't really obsess about it, but at least have a good idea. You should always know how much your fixed monthly expenses are. Ideally, if you can budget for yourself, like, you know, this month I'm going to spend only $1,000 on food, you know, food going out and stuff like that, which is probably a lot, but that brings me joy and that brings me passion. That's fine. And maybe on the next column, spend a little bit less on something else, you know, other luxury items you can spend less on, right? Instead of having like a name brand sweater, buy like a plain sweater. You know, it'll probably feel the same to you. But like we said earlier, to connect, it's all about like finding what makes you happy. I always have this running joke with my friends that when I go to a restaurant, every restaurant to me is all you can eat buffet. No matter how much the things are, every restaurant to me is all you can eat buffet, because I find a lot of happiness and joy and pleasure in trying new food and not being handcuffed by the prices, which is a very fortunate thing that I get the luxury to do. I'll be the first one to tell you that, but that's not because I'm sitting on bags of physical money. That's because I choose to save in other places so that when I go to a restaurant, I don't look at the right column where it says how much it is. I just get whatever I want because I want to try it, and that makes me happy. And that's me internally finding happiness. So a budget is always good. Leave yourself space to spend money on the places that do make you actually happy. And then the other things is where you try to save money on, right? If your gas bill's too high, see if you can switch gas companies if that's something that's available to you. If your cell phone bill is high, same thing too. Car insurance side, like there are other ways you can spend a couple minutes just to save a couple $100. You know, those areas save money on. The other areas that matter to you, give yourself a break within reason. Give yourself a break. Don't count every penny.
Yeah, that's so true. Like, I mean, it's like, I know there are people who live a completely frugal life and then they're like, they go cheap on everything, but then just like, what's the fun, you know, in it, living that kind of life, right? I mean, at least allow yourself, like you mentioned, one aspect or two aspects in your life to, you know, have fun a little. Not every aspect in life if you don't sit on actual bags of cash.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to make a choice. You can't have everything in life. There's only a few people that can just get whatever the hell they want in life and not have to think about money. Yeah. Most of us are not like that.
I don't think Warren Buffett is going cray-cray with everything, right? Like,
right.
he lives
has
in
a lot of money.
rather... Yeah, but then he lives in a rather modest home as well. So, I
I
mean,
can see that.
even a person like him, he was saying that despite all the money that he has, and being one of the richest people on earth,
Mm.
he would still choose to have a watch that's good enough, not like one of those like luxury or crazy watches out there. And
Yeah,
then he would live in a relatively humble home because that's just enough for him and he doesn't need
right.
anything more. So I think this mindset is really what makes people rich. Like, if we would like to use the word rich, like, it's
Hmm.
not the fact that he has lots of money. I mean, you could be a billionaire, but then if you have like shitty money spending habits, you
Exactly.
could still become homeless the next minute.
Of course. If we learn nothing else from this is like two parts. One, you should really figure out what makes you happy and spend your time and your
Mm,
focus on that. And number two, this is like a very old saying, but a penny saved is a penny earned. If you cannot make more
mm,
money somewhere, if you cannot find a better job that pays you more money, if you cannot do good investments that will net you better passive income, if you can't do any of that, you can always save more money. And like I said, save in the reasonable places to save money. You don't have to reuse toilet paper. Going back to toilet paper again, right? Save wherever you can save money, because saving a lot of money is just as it's the exact same net result as you making a little bit more money.
I mean, just now you mentioned when you're budgeting, you used to have an Excel sheet, but now you kind of like don't really do it religiously anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, like if you have any money habit or advice for our listeners, let's say if they're the most type B, if they are Ben, like obviously
Oh god.
maintaining an Excel sheet will not really work for them, right? Because
Mm-mm.
I feel like there are people who, I mean, I think one really useful mindset to have is like, don't let any fancy habits or like tools to get in the way of you managing your finances.
Yeah.
Like, you don't actually need an Excel sheet to be able to
No.
get your finances in order. Like, you can work out your own way to do it. But then I'm wondering if for listeners, or for Ben who would like to get started with like sorting out their finances, is there like one thing that you would suggest them to do almost religiously?
I guess it's very similar to what I said before, but I'm always reassessing my financial status, and I'm always reassessing where my assets are. Like, I'm constantly aware of how much money I have in these assets or in this portfolio here or in these physical goods. I'm always aware of my situation. And that's not me having to always sit down and calculate. It's a general idea. I don't have everything down to the dollar, right? I'm always reassessing and I'm always following the news. And this is not me
Mm.
religiously reading the Financial Times or anything like that. But, I'm always like, that's the whole point of the podcast. You can always listen to something while you do something else, and being aware of the world environment and being aware of your own financial status allows you, whenever you need to readjust your financial situation, right? I was having a chat with a bunch of friends who were like talking this past weekend about whether or not they should be paying more into their mortgage, or because some CDs are giving a higher interest than what their mortgage is, maybe they should be putting more money in that, as long as the principles are the same. Like, you should always be aware of the world environment and your own financial status. And that's just having the right tools to do it. I don't think there's one tool
Mm.
that I use. I just have a lot of banking apps, and I'm every once in a while just checking in to see where I am. I have this constant, I guess, idea in my head. But just being
Hmm.
fully aware of where you are financially and being aware of where the world is financially, not to the detail for either things, but just have a general idea is always good.
Hmm. And if I could ask a follow-up question, let's say if you
Yeah.
see headlines saying the Fed is not going to cut rates, or like more
Mm-hmm.
inflation, is on the way, right? Like, what would be your first reaction? Like, will you be making a call to like your financial advisor, if you have one, or like what would be something that you do related to your money?
I'm very risk adverse, so even my financial stuff is all tied up in ETFs and index funds,
Mm,
because I'm more of like a long-term thinker. I don't think I am personally smart enough to be picking individual stocks. And also, like I said before, the
mm,
past 10, 15 years, everyone was a stock genius because the market overall, generally speaking, was doing well. So it was very easy to make money during those years. And even during those years, same thing too, ETFs, index funds, like in the long haul, I'm sure you've read through Warren Buffett and through like a lot of other people. If you just bet on the market overall, it's always a better go, as long as you have the ability to wait long term for something, right? This is not day trading I'm talking about. This is more like long term things. So I'm never
yeah.
reacting to things via stocks and things like that. Maybe I'm adjusting, like I need to like for the example of that friend, maybe I'm going to put more money into CDs because they're paying 5%, but his mortgage is like, I don't know, 2.5 or 3% because he got a good rate years ago. Not factoring the principal amount because I know that throws off the math, but you know, it's more like small things like that. I'm not so reactive in the moment in the day. It's more reactive, generally speaking, across the month, across the weeks or so.
And one thing I've been testing out for fun, I mean, I'm not like really banking on it. It's like sometimes I'll allocate a little bit of like play money.
What's
just
play
a
money?
little bit.
What are you playing, Isabel?
I mean, let me get to the point.
Sorry.
Play money to test out new financial options. Like these days there are a lot of like AI, like AI is everywhere, right? Like AI robo advisor, and they would like, based on algorithms, and they put together this like portfolio that the AI thinks will make money. So I did not put a lot of money in there, but then I put like a tiny bit just to like fulfill my curiosity. Like, is this actually going to work? So maybe, it's this is not even, I don't even call it an investment. It's kind of like an experiment. It's like,
it is.
For me, to fulfill my curiosity, like, can AI really replace like human investment decisions? Not that I think human investment decisions are really smart, because human actually make a lot of like
dumb decisions.
Dumb decisions when it comes to investments. Yeah, so I was just kind of like really comparing, like, does AI have something that we don't?
You would think that on the surface, AI should theoretically make better decisions because they can calculate and process so much more information than a human can, right? In theory, it seems like it would make sense because they're looking at the historical trends and they're predicting based on forecasting the future. It seems like it. But, to your point, humans don't even make a decision. There's lots of people that just freaking throw stuff at a dartboard and it just happens to work out.
It's literally emotions. Yeah.
Yeah. There's like the things where people are like making bets based on which banana the monkey at the zoo takes, like I forgot. There's some experiment where they did something like that and they pitted him against an actual trader, and the monkey did better based on stocks off of which bananas he picked. And that's a maybe one-off example, but I'm trying to say, like, if people want to invest in stocks, I feel like you really need to invest a lot of time. You need to do a lot more research than the average person can do to invest in stocks. Because to me, like I said, I'm risk adverse. So I feel like when you're jumping into an option like that, you really need to know exactly what's going on with the company, what's going on with the market. There's so much stuff to factor in that I think even a good, well-intentioned person probably is not able to process all that. Which is why, to me, I invest in ETFs, index funds, like sector funds. It's different. If you want to just bank on, I don't know, solar overall, as opposed to like one particular solar company, like that's where your thoughts are long term, then you can do that.
Yeah, and that whole like index fund and ETF is basically a manifestation of like diversification, right? Like you don't put all your eggs in one basket. And I think these days, like a lot of investment decisions have been really driven by social media or like influencers. And then, there are people who aren't completely educated when it comes to, I'm not saying I'm really educated, but then there are people who would literally just listen to social media, like a 1 minute reel or like a YouTube video, and then like they would put all their money in this like new asset class, and then they would just hope that it's going to make them rich, but that it's never going to be as simple as that. And I feel like maybe like you and I are kind of like old school or tradition in a way, but then I still think, like you mentioned, ETF and index fund are relatively safe options. But if you do want to try out maybe like new products or like new asset classes, I think I would mostly suggest, like you go in without expecting that you're going to make money. You think of it as experiment, or even like I mentioned earlier, like play money.
Like you go in knowing that you're going to lose all the money.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's just like you need to go into those like newer asset classes with the expectation that you're going to lose all of that.
Yeah. And then, like I said, with cryptocurrency, with NFTs, with things like that came to fruition the past couple of years, there are a lot of people that made a shitload of money super, super fast, right? So that gives you the person that like, holy shit, this guy made 1,000 times his investment on Dogecoin. I want to do the next thing that's going to do that, right? There is like this FOMO that's constantly in there, which drives people to make dumb decisions. Just think how long it took you to make that dollar. If you're going to invest your dollar in something, take a little bit of time and like do your research, right? It takes a long time to make $100. You should spend an equal amount of time thinking about where you're going to put that $100 instead of just YOLOing it. Ultimately, if you make a bad choice, but you did your research, there's nothing else that you could have done. Like you did the best you could. Just don't YOLO things like that.
That's true. And normally, like, those stories get rich overnight that make headlines. Like, if that works for one person, everyone will want to try that. But then if everyone tries that, it means that it's not going to work very quickly.
Yeah.
But now it's time for us to move on to the next segment, which is Rapid Bias. In this segment, I'll be asking my guests biased questions that they've got asked at some points in life. And in Lingjie's case, common misconceptions people have about money and Lingjie's wealth in general. So, Lingjie, are you ready for all these non-bias that are coming your way?
I'm ready for these very biased questions. Go ahead.
All right, let's get started. First question. Lingjie is rich. It's not a bias, is it?
Okay, that is probably factually true because I'm a very real person, because I know I am so much more privileged than a lot of the world is, right? Like, I'm a very humble person in the sense that I know that the fact that I don't have to worry about a lot of things means that it's probably true. So I am very rich. And, just to earn extra points, I am very rich with love. I have love for my wife. I have love for my son, for my parents. Like, I am very abundantly filled with the rich human connections.
Nice one. Wow. And next question. I don't think you need to even answer at length for this one. Lingjie is richer than Ben. And for our listeners' context, Ben is Lingjie's podcast co-host on Worst Asian Podcast.
Yes, I probably am richer than Ben because I made better financial choices with my life. But currently, I think Ben on paper makes more money than me right now because, like I said, I'm really not working a job. So that's maybe not true. That's maybe not true. And I constantly want people like Ben to listen to your series and hopefully get some better advice, because I think people like Ben who make a good amount of money on paper just need to make better financial choices with their lives.
Maybe he has something hiding from you. He has like a whole vault of like
no.
Somewhere.
Ben is not smart enough to hold a secret like that. If Ben had a vault of gold bars or something, he would forget the passcode to his vault and have to ask me how he opens a door. So no. Ben is not hiding anything.
I always wonder, it's like, on your podcast, you guys are always dividing that personalities. Like, Ben is always kind of the type B and irresponsible one, and Lingjie is always the got his shit together one. But then I always would imagine, what if in real life Lingjie is the one who actually can't get his shit together?
It's
and
all
you're
an
framing
act.
Ben.
It's all an act.
Now the next question. Lingjie eats Alaskan king crab every day.
I eat Alaskan king crab more often than the average person does, but I do not eat it every day. If you don't know what Alaskan king crab is, I think it's above snow crab, which I think is technically different. Maybe I'm not sure. It's this big crab with a giant head and very large, long legs. And the meat in the legs is what's really, really good. And per pound, it's very expensive. And a lot of that per pound that you're paying is just for the shell, which I think is kind of a ripoff. But as with all luxury foods, that's just how it is, right? I do eat it much more often, not because I personally choose to. It's just I go to a lot of celebratory things with family and stuff like that, and it's always like there on the table whenever we go out to eat. We choose to buy it, we choose to try it. I am a victim of my circumstances. Please don't hate me.
If we put this one out as real, we're so gonna get cancelled. It's like the guy who talks about Alaskan king crab and he's sick of it.
It's delicious. I didn't have it the last time that it was at a table. I forgot where this was. This was at my mother-in-law's birthday at their house, and they got king crab. I didn't even touch it.
Wow.
Because I was trying to save it for the other people, okay? That's the real answer. I wasn't tired of it. I was just trying to save it for the other family members, I could have it whenever, I wanted them to enjoy it. I am so fucking getting canceled.
All right, so everyone, next time if you go to Lingjie's house or if you have celebration dinners with him, please expect Alaskan king crab. Now, the final question. I can answer for you, but Lingjie has a stash of Dom P in his basement.
I do not have a stash. I have one singular bottle. Okay, I have a stash of lots of wine in my basement. Wine I have a stash of. Don P, I have one singular bottle that I have not found a good enough occasion to open it for. And I'll tell you, I think I've only had Don P like once in my life, and that was like a sip at someone's wedding. So it's not as if I'm always.
Were you impressed?
No, I wasn't. That's the thing. With so many luxury things, I feel like you're so much. It's obviously better, right? But it's not that fold better. It's not 10 times better. It's not worth the price at that point. So that's why I have not found an occasion to drink the one that's in my wine cooler, because I just think it's probably not going to be worth it. It's going to be more disappointing when I have it. But
yeah,
Isabel,
it's always the anticipation.
When you come to New York, Isabel, I've made this promise to you. Whenever you come to New York and I see you in person, we'll get some Don P and maybe some king crab now.
Oh my god! Wow. Okay, I'm booking my tickets, or I'm looking for airlines sponsors. If anyone would like to send me to New York so we can do this king crab Dom P.
Dinners only take like 3
Please.
hours. It could be like a quick trip. She can just have a layover here or something. I don't know.
Exactly. You bring everything to the airport. And then once we're done, I'll go back in and then fly.
Right back to the flight. Past TSA. Just imagine me walking past TSA with the king crab and the Don in the other hand.
Can you get through TSA with that?
I don't think you can.
You
I
can't.
don't think you can. Yeah,
You can't.
liquid limits. Liquid limits. It's too big of a liquid. And I don't know what the rules are for live crustaceans.
Oh, that's true. That's true. I was gonna suggest like you and Ben should like each carry like a tiny bottle and then like with some Dom P.
Lots of tiny bottles. Lots of tiny Dom P's.
Yeah.
Travel size.
All right, let's conclude this non-rapid bias. Now, to close out the episode, Lingjie, we talked a lot about your money philosophies, life wisdom. I just want to leave this episode with one of the realest Asian dad advice that you could give our listeners, because you're an Asian dad. What would it be? It does not have to be money related. Like any piece of advice that you live by.
Spend as much time with your kids as you can, and that just means occupying that. That does not just mean occupying the same physical space. You can't occupy the same physical space if you're both on the phone and he's watching TV. Spend as much real time with your kids as you can, because before you know it, and this is the same shit everyone says, but they grow up so fucking fast. And I'm not even talking about when they get 18 years old and they have to leave the house for college. They're going to get to a certain point early in their school years when they just don't even want to really talk to you that much anymore, where it's more of a nuisance and a chore to spend time with you. So especially in those early years of having a kid, be present for them as much as you can. Be physically and mentally present for them. You know, I see so many parents, and I'm not trying to hate on them, because I know every parent does their best, but they don't spend enough real quality time with their kids. They may be in the same place, but their dad's on the phone in the corner and their kid's like in the playground, you know, running around doing his own thing. Be present for your kids, both mentally and physically.
Wow. And now, finally, this is a twist to a question that we normally ask our guests on Proudly Asian. What does it mean to be a proud Asian dad to you?
Being a proud Asian dad has made me realize that I'm also a proud Asian son, because the amount of love and the style of love that I show for my son is completely different than the style that my dad showed for me. So now, having had my own son, I realize, you know, everyone shows love in a very different way. You know, it's a running joke that Asian parents don't say "I love you," but you know, factually, that is the case most of the time. My dad, my mom never said that to me, but I know now, looking back on it, and I know like how I feel for my son, that my parents felt the same amount of love for me, just that their way of expressing it was completely different. So being a proud Asian dad also means realizing that I'm a proud Asian son.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Rich Lingjie, for joining us.
Oh God, you just have to turn it back that way. You have to take a nice sentimental moment and just turn the shit back around on me having money.
I'm so good at this. Yeah, I mean, I'll make sure, like in post production, I leave a few seconds before I come in.
Oh yeah. A few seconds for
Yeah.
you or the listeners to digest that before you turn it right back
To
380.
let that sink in before I
180.
ruin the whole moment. Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you took the time to chat with us about your life philosophy, because I feel like a lot of times, like when we're chatting offline, we don't really go this way. And I always know that you're kind of one of the wisest people around, or at least I know. And I'm always curious, like, what kind of life secret or wisdom that you can share with us. So I'm so glad we did this.
Thank you so much for having me on. And I want to leave people knowing that I am by far not the wisest person. I am just very well aware of myself and what I want from life. And I think if anything, people just need to reassess what they want from their lives and do things accordingly. Like I kept saying, internal happiness, intrinsic happiness, not external factors like that. So I'm not wise. I'm just well aware of who I am.
And make sure you guys check out Worst Asian Podcast.
Yep,
Thanks,
that's not
Lingjie.
a joke. That's the actual podcast. Thank you, Isabel.
That's it for this episode of Proudly Asian. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at proudly.asian for more content. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Leave us a 5-star review on wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and signing off for now. I'm Isabel Wong.